Good morning, Britain. Bereft of ideas or purpose, the damning criticism of the government for failing to tackle the cost of living crisis in the Queen's speech. Majesty thought as well?
Yep.
Because of millions who are facing rising bills and poverty.
I think
the trouble is that they have a tax that's being, a number of taxes, but one particular, national insurance. That at Brexit campaign, there was a proposal that if we were free of EU regulation, we could get rid of seeing as we have done Brexit, to get rid of it. Struggling with your food bills, and delivering the Queen's speech. We talked about that it was a moment of history that we were anticipating yesterday morning. And then, that's not my idea, Kevin. That's sort of shocked by, Kevin. About stools and motions, whether we should just say in those terms, isn't it? Because for a lot of people, if you hear there's blood in the motion, you might not know where if you go, because it's terrifying for people. Yeah. And people are so scared sometimes of hearing that they've got cancer. We can go and say, these are the symptoms, and you can go, here's a pill for that. Family members did.
They did, of course.
About that they weren't being seen at school. Yeah. Family members were tearing their hair out in a number of cases.
That's right.
That meant, or in the police, because in some cases, those calls were made, that meant that those calls weren't followed up.
So this was a
tragedy for too many of these kids.
Well, we talked about late in life and be compared to Andrew Pierce.
Just gone 6 o'clock. Welcome to the programme. Well, I don't know about 184 million, but I wonder what the crown is actually worth. I mean, the way that Charles was eyeballed
making the speech, and I thought it was very symbolic that Charles, the heir to the throne, sits down in order to do the constitutional duty that his mother...
As a kind of a prelude to it, that we were going to be seeing a page of history turning a bit later. And he did a really good job.
Yes.
I thought he delivered it very, very well.
And apparently that's what her insider has spoken to the papers this morning.
Who are these royal insiders?
And said the Queen was very proud to see her son, and of course her grandson, William, as well, step in. She watched on television from Windsor Castle. But our main news this morning, of course, is about the content of that speech, because the government has ruled out an emergency budget to help people struggling to cope with the cost of living crisis. Opposition parties and charities say the Queen's speech contained nothing to support families in the short term.
Well, Boris Johnson did warn that the government could not, quote, completely shield, unquote, people from rising prices, but he did promise that ministers would have what he called the fiscal firepower to help in the future. He was talking about growth. Well, our political correspondent...
That's our main news this morning. Coming up, we're going to be discussing reaction to the Queen's speech with Kevin Maguire and Ed Vasey. But first, here's Charlotte. Too much! There's too much! Right, let's have a look at the weather. Here's Laura. Laura, thank you. Still to come on Good Morning Britain. Deborah James, of course, says she's reaching the end.
And she is loved, isn't she? Plus, Alistair Campbell wants us to get the news, the travel and the weather wherever you are.
See you in a moment.
Numbers came up and it was new last night.
Is it too much for you?
1 million. What do you think, more or less, the Crown? Google this. Between 3 and 5 billion pounds. It's got 2,800